I want to talk with you today in many ways about the invisible part of your organizations. I'm not going to talk about your businesses. I'm not going to talk about subscription services or all this stuff you're really here to learn about. I'm here to talk about the culture of your company, and I want to call you to a path of nonconformance. Rollo May, a psychologist in the 20s, once famously stated that the opposite of courage is not cowardice, but conformity. And I'm a guy who writes business books of nonconformity. They call you to things like joy and love. Who knew that you could actually write business books with those words on the cover and get taken seriously? But given the number of places I get called around the world to speak on the topic of joy in the context of business, clearly this is something the world is desperate to hear. So let me tell you a little bit of personal history of me, just to kind of know where I'm coming from, because in many ways I am not in the Venn diagram of the folks that are here today, although you are all affected by the kind of work that my industry does. I am a programmer. I grew up writing software. The first time I touched a computer was way back in 1971. Yes, kids, there were in fact computers back in those days. They were a little different than they are today, but I typed a 2-line program into a computer in 1971, and it clacked out on a roll of paper, because that's the way they used to work, and it said, "Hi, Rich." So that's what I told it to do. By 1973, I had typed in the entire baseball register of Major League Baseball players so that my friends and I could play our favorite baseball teams against one another in the cold Michigan winter months. Mine being the Tigers, of course. Yep, you're looking at the guy who invented fantasy baseball. My life is likely littered with lost opportunities like this. I entered that program in an international programming contest. I won the gaming category, and a career was launched. By 1973, I was actually writing code as a job before I could even drive a car. I couldn't believe people would pay me to do this thing I was doing as a hobby, and it was a whopping $3 an hour, which was $1 an hour more than I was making as a dishwasher at Big Boy at the time. Eventually, I went up to the grand and glorious University of Michigan and got a couple of degrees in computer science and computer engineering, and a career was launched. And I will tell you, the career that followed looked perfect. The way the world measures success, I had it. Between 1982 and 1997, I advanced from programmer to VP of R&D for what would become the #1 public company in Michigan. Every year brought me raises, stock options, promotions, bigger title, bigger authority, bigger office, more pay. I had everything the world measures as success. There was only one problem, and it was here. I was quickly falling out of love for a profession I thought would carry me for a lifetime. By my mid-30s, I didn't even want to be in the industry anymore. I had a plan B. My plan B was to escape the software industry, take my wife and 3 daughters to the boundary waters of Minnesota, and start a canoe camp. Yeah, the women always laugh the same, just the way my wife does. She always asks me, she's like, "Seriously, Rich, did you think the girls and I would follow you to the boundary waters?" But I will tell you, there will be at least one guy in this room after my talk who will pull me aside and say, "Hey, Rich, how far did you get along with the boundary camp idea? You know, do you have a business plan?" So what was going on? How was it possible that I had all this worldly success and yet I wanted to escape? Well, I will tell you, in the software industry, and you probably have experienced some version of this, even though I know some of you are software providers, software industry is one that's filled with chaos. Chaos of firefighting, chaos of work not getting completed, chaos of bugs galore, chaos of missed deadlines, blown budgets, and so on. I would come home after very long days, and my wife would look at tired me and say, "Honey, you look really tired tonight. Did you get a lot done today?" And I realized, no, I got nothing done today. I ran from one end of the day to the other, and I was busy from one end of the day to the other, but absolutely nothing done. Now, in the land of nothing done, in the land of chaos, bad things happen, don't they? Negative events. In my first book, I wrote about a negative event at a New York Stock Exchange trading platform, not my negative event, but a tired programmer made a simple server update error, and in the next 45 minutes, the Knight Capital Group New York Stock Exchange trading platform traded $7 billion worth of securities it wasn't supposed to, costing Knight Capital Group $400 million in losses in 45 minutes. Would that be considered a negative event where you work? Now, when there's a negative event, there is typically an organizational response. In the software industry, it often looks like a three-ring binder, and we have to give it an acronym because we love our acronyms. We'll call it something like the SDLC, the Software Development Lifecycle Process. And this little book is filled with stage gates and templates and committees and review forms and sign-offs and approvals and standing meetings and all this kind of stuff, and you have to put a police force in charge of it, project management office, just to make sure all the forms are filled out. And you go from chaos to full-blown bureaucracy. You go from the land of never getting anything done to, quite frankly, the land of never getting anything started, right? Because you're waiting for something to happen. You're waiting for an approval. You're waiting for a sign-off or a meeting to occur. And this was my life. And yet, in my chaotic, bureaucratic life now, things still had to happen. So shadow groups would form. The shadow IT team would learn to placate the bureaucracy while operating in chaos at the same time. Yeah. Now you see why my heart was breaking. Now, usually somebody would wake up at some point and say, hey, whoa, let's back this bureaucracy off a little bit. Let's just create a lighter version of things, a little stapled together document for smaller projects. And then eventually everybody wakes up and says, hey, even those meetings aren't getting scheduled. Let's cancel the bureaucracy. Let's fire the PMO. Let's declare we're agile now or we're lean or something like that. And usually all that really means is, you know what? We like chaos. Chaos at least feels more energizing. So that's what was going on down here. That's why I wanted out. Now, those who know me well know that I am an eternal, or as my co-founder likes to call me, an infernal optimist. If you stick me in a room full of manure, which is exactly where it was, I'm going to keep digging because I know there's a pony in here somewhere. And so my journey out led me to authors and books. But the interesting thing was it wasn't books on technology. It was books on organizational design and leadership, books like Tom Peters' In Search of Excellence, Peter Drucker's books on management, Peter Senge's book, The Fifth Discipline, on the art and practice of building a learning organization. All of these books were telling me there was a different way of doing things than was customary. My job was to find it. And that if I did, there was a great promised land waiting for me. And in 1999, I read a book by a guy named Kent Beck on a new way of working in software called extreme programming, which is not about programmers jumping off of cliffs with bungee cords or anything like that, just a new way to organize a software team. I saw a video on an industrial design firm in California called IDEO. Nightline had done an episode on them back then. And literally, click moment. I knew where I was going, and I never looked back, and I transformed that tired old public company to something that looks like my company, Menlo Innovations, to this day. And in 2001, there was a big inflection point in the software industry. Some of you may remember. This thing called the internet bubble burst. And for the first time since 1973, I was out of work. And they could take away everything. They could take away job, title, authority, stock options. Everything was gone. Parking spot, key in the door didn't work to the office. But they couldn't take away what I had learned in those 2 years. And that was the basis for the company we formed since then. So what did we learn? Well, what we learned in those 2 years was there is no perfect setting dial for bureaucracy. What we learned is you can actually throw this picture away entirely and replace it with something different. And that's what I want to share with you today. I tell you the setup and the history to this moment simply because I want you to know I have escaped that world. And for the last 20 years now, I have been living in a land that I would call joyful, one that my kids are now convinced I will never retire from. They often tell me, they say, Dad, we will drag a smiling, lifeless 95-year-old guy out of Menlo someday. And I like that. I like that my kids don't think I will ever have to retire because I'm having so much fun at work. So what did we learn? And what I want to do is bring into bear a hobby of mine. And the hobby is flying little airplanes. But what I want to do is compare the metaphor of an aircraft and the forces at work on that aircraft to the metaphor of human organizations, and in particular, your human organizations. Because I think in this metaphor, there are lessons for you to take home with you. So if we think about an aircraft, we know that lift is what holds it up. The shape of the wings and so on lifts that plane up. There's a countervailing force of weight and gravity that holds it back down. There's a force that pulls us forward called thrust, and a force that holds us back called drag. And so these are the four basic forces at work on an aircraft. How does this compare to a human organization? Well, in human teams, there is this element of lift, human energy. You can feel it when you get into work, can't you? You know when things are going well and when they're not. There's a weight that holds us down, the weight of bureaucracy. There's a thrust that pulls us forward, a thrust of purpose, and there's a drag that holds us back, the drag of fear. And if we want our organizational aircraft to fly like that little airplane, what do we need to do? Well, what we need to do is focus on things that lift the human energy of our team. What kind of things can lift the human energy of our team? I will tell you that clarity is a big deal. People understanding what they're supposed to be doing when they're at work. The ability to go to work and get meaningful things done is actually really valuable. You know, if you're anything like me, I'm kind of a checklist-oriented person. How many checklist-oriented people are there? Yeah, you know what it's like. If you're a Saturday morning and you're working on your checklist and you realize you did 3 things that weren't on your list, you're going to write them down just so you can cross them off, right? Because it feels so good, doesn't it? Now, what holds us back? Well, what I'll tell you is meeting culture is what holds us back. If you want to weigh down the energy of your human organization, have lots and lots and lots of meetings. Long meetings, without breaks. And oh, by the way, for goodness sakes, do not make any decisions in those meetings. Okay? And if you happen to make a decision, please, please, please do not act on it. Okay, that'll weigh your organization down. I'll talk a little bit later on the thrust of purpose, because this is a big deal. This is what carries our teams forward. This is what will attract a lot of the talent you're trying to bring into your organizations. And the drag of fear. I will tell you that a good portion of my managerial career was modeled after the managers I had. And my managers were really good at teaching me how to generate fear in order to motivate. Artificial fear. I had a boss once who just walked around and say, "Hey, how's it going? What you working on? Are you coming in this weekend? Are you almost done? Can you feel your blood pressure rising right now?" Right? He actually told me, "Rich, if you see 2 people standing in a corridor talking to one another, just walk up to them and stand there." He says, "They'll get back to work." Now, this is hilarious because you're going to find out at our company, we actually pair people together, and we've institutionalized 2 people talking to each other all day long at work. So, now to really get to the place we want to be with our organizational aircrafts, what do we need to do? Well, we need to decrease the amount of fear. We'll never get rid of all of it, and there's actually some fear that is really healthy. It's the fear that keeps you from walking out into a busy street without looking both ways. We want to decrease the weight and the bureaucracy of organization. We want to increase the human energy. We want to increase the purpose. And if we do this, if we do it, wait for it, your organizational aircraft will get off the ground every single day. Now, I'm going to torture this metaphor just a little more. You didn't realize you're going to get a lesson in aerodynamics today. There will be a test afterwards. Number your notes from 1 to 1,000, please. If you ever look at an aircraft, you're going to see the wings are tilted up just a little bit. They're not square to the aircraft. That design principle actually goes back as far as the Wright brothers. And that angle is called the dihedral. And what that angle produces is something that you really value as a user of an aircraft when you get on a commercial flight and that plane goes tutunk. You know that feeling, right? It probably happened on the way here because it's a little bit, the weather here gets things bumping around a little bit. That angle actually produces what aircraft designers call positive stability. The opposite of positive stability is catastrophic instability, that if the plane tips, is just going to go down to the ground. You want your aircraft to be positively stable. I will suggest to you, you want your organization to be positively stable. And if you create the right systems, you can get to that so that when the plane, your organizational aircraft is bumping around, your systems by themselves can take care of most of the minor issues so that you as leaders can take care of the big stuff. This is the benefit of positively stable aircraft. Now, there's one other delightful piece of language here that I just can't resist sharing with you. When that aircraft rolls down the runway and you're about to take off, hits just the right speed, the pilot pulls back just a little bit on the yoke and creates, in aircraft terminology, something called a positive attitude. Isn't that delightful? And when you create that positive attitude for the aircraft or your organization, boop, off you go. A little bit of history, because I think the purpose part of this is so important. The Wright brothers were competing to build the first man-powered aircraft. They were competing against a much better funded Samuel Pierpont Langley. My clicker is not clicking. There we go. And Samuel Pierpont Langley was a much better funded team in Washington, D.C. When the Wright brothers achieved first man-powered flight, Langley quit, which was kind of surprising even to historians to this day, because there was still a lot more to be done. I think the difference between the Wright brothers and Langley, because the Wright brothers were these two guys running a bicycle shop in Dayton, Ohio, was the purpose of their efforts. Langley was trying to build an aircraft. The Wright brothers wanted to fly. And in that difference makes all the difference. Now, what's interesting too, though, is even the inventor of the aircraft had limited visibility on what they had created. Orville Wright, shortly after the first man-powered flight, said at most we will be able to build an aircraft that can carry 2 people, and that's it. It is physically impossible to build an aircraft that it could ever carry more than 2 people. How do I know this? I know this because I read it in a book on Orville Wright's life. I read it in a book on a 747, flying from Detroit to London. 35,000 feet, 500 miles an hour, 400 passengers, all their baggage, 50,000 gallons of fuel. And here's the point. When we discover the relevant principles that can drive either aircraft or human organizations, we can lift the human energy of our team, and we can fly to heights and distances that were previously unimaginable, even to the inventors. Here's a small picture of my human organization. We work in one of those vilified open office environments you hear about, the kind Fast Company magazine calls an idea born in the mind of Satan in the deepest caverns of hell. There is solid research that proves these open and collaborative offices do not work. Harvard just came out with another study on this. So if you need any data, if you're contemplating going to an open office and you want to kill that initiative, just come see me. I have all the research because everyone in the world sends it to me. But you may not want to listen to the rest of the talk. But our organizational aircraft similarly didn't believe we could get more than 2 people off the ground on any given day. The thing we were trying to pursue in our mission was to end human suffering in the world as it relates to technology. You all, if you're willing to admit it or not, are tortured by software. You are tortured by my industry, right? Think about it. I don't have to go any further than the stupid chip-reading credit card machines we're all tortured by every single day. You know, the ones you're not sure if you're supposed to swipe or insert? And then when you insert, you didn't put it in far enough, so you can pull it out, put it in again. And then the one that blinks at you, do not remove card. Oh, believe me, I'm not removing that card. Until finally it says remove the card, and then it beeps at you, right? Stupid user, stupid user, stupid user. You see, my industry learned to call all of you stupid users. Then we wrote dummies books for you poor people. And then we got you to self-deprecate. How many of you have ever said to yourselves, even I've done this, oh, you know me, I'm just a stupid user. I'm like, yes, we got you right where we want you. What other industry could get away with calling the people they serve stupid? I hope yours doesn't. But ultimately, what we really wanted in terms of ending human suffering was we wanted to be able to take a chance to work with pride, to get past the emergencies that had plagued my earlier career. Now, if someone had suggested to me, Rich, it'd be really cool if your organizational aircraft could get down to one emergency a week. I'd be like, I don't know, come on, really? I mean, I'm in firefighting mode every day. No, really, one a week? They said, but one a month would be amazing. Oh, come on. One a quarter would be insanely good. How about one a year? I'd be like, come on, really? The last time our team has experienced a software emergency, and we work on software that often holds the lives of people in its hands, the organ transplant information system at a major healthcare system, medical devices that monitor the treatment of people who have AIDS and cancer. The last time our team remembers a software emergency, a true software emergency, was 2004. That's the equivalent of 35,000 feet at 500 miles an hour, in my view. So what do we have to do to build this kind of culture of joyful leadership that can produce those kind of results? These are the things I've learned, and I'm sharing them with you. By no means am I trying to tell you I am the world's foremost expert on joyful leadership, but it is something we talk about all the time. There is this sense of we want to start with purpose. Purpose will pull us forward. We want to value leaders rather than hierarchical authority because we'll actually get more done through influential leadership. We want to pursue systems thinking that will keep our organizational aircraft safe and flying right rather than bureaucracy. We want to actually care for our team, take care of the people. We want to build a learning organization like Peter Senge talked about in the fifth discipline, and ultimately, I will tell you, one of the greatest strengths of good leaders is the ability to tell stories. Because as humans, this is the part that connects us so deeply. Storytelling is one of the oldest traditions of human history. These are the things we have to think about inside of each of our organizations if we want to pull ourselves forward. And where does the journey start? Because I will tell you, I give this talk both at Menlo. We get about 3,000 visitors a year who come from all over the world just to see us. If you're interested in that, I brought some brochures back in a little round table at the back of the room if you want to come see us. But when I give talks like this, I can usually see thought bubbles over people's heads. And I know what you're thinking. What you're thinking is, you go, Rich. Boy, do they need to hear this. I am so glad my boss is, or I wish my boss was here to hear what you're talking about. Let me tell you where the journey has to begin, and it's a painful place to begin. It's with you. Yes. Come on up. I love it. Now, how did this journey begin for me? I will tell you that in Ann Arbor schools, maybe you have it where you live, we have this program that says take your child to work day to see how your parents' work day goes. This is not my 8-year-old daughter, that's not me. But when my daughter Sarah was 8, I took her to work with me. I was a newly minted VP, and she was going to watch her VP dad work all day. Can you imagine a more boring day? I mean, what on earth is somebody going to see watching a VP work all day, right? Oh, my dad does email. My dad answers phone calls. My dad has meetings. Woohoo, I can't wait to be my dad, right? So at the end of the day, she fortunately had brought crayons and markers and stickers, coloring books. She sat at my task table all day watching her dad work. And at the end of the day, I thought, well, I better ask her, because the teacher's going to. I said, Sarah, how was your day? What did you learn today? Boom, out of the mouths of 8-year-olds. She said, what I learned, Dad, was you're really important. I pulled up a chair and I sat down. I said, tell me more. And she said, well, what I saw is all day long, everybody coming into your office, and it was clear to me no one could make a decision without asking you first. Because in that moment, that clanging cymbal moment in my head, I realized I'd built a company, an organization that couldn't move faster than me. And the only way to scale an organization like that is to scale me. And the only way to scale me is overtime. And my kids were still young. I was worried that I was going to wake up 10 years later and miss the best part of being a dad. And I didn't want that. So the journey had to begin here first. It had to begin with me. And I will suggest to you, if you're intrigued by this idea of building a culture of joyful leadership within your organization, the good news is you don't have to go very far to start. And where you need to start is with purpose. And I will tell you, the purpose part of an organization is important. You need to think about these questions today and from this day forward if you take my talk seriously. Who do you serve and what would delight look like for them? And this is an intriguing question that isn't as easy to answer as you think. And I'm going to take the 3 obvious stakeholders off the table. I'm going to take your employees off the table, your customers off the table, and your investors off the table. Of course you have to serve them. Without customers, you have no revenues. Without employees, you get nothing done. Without stakeholders, you have no capital to invest. You have to serve them, but that is still self-serving. What I'm going to suggest you do is look past those stakeholders. When we look at that at Menlo, we look to the end users of the software that we are designing and developing. We look at people who will never meet us, who won't even know who we are, who will one day sit down and not be tortured by the work of our team. We'll actually look at the software we design and build and say, well, of course it works this way. How else could it work? It's just obvious, right? Simple design, not necessarily easy to get to. But we want to delight them. Now, I had a set of life insurance executives come in one time, and they were contemplating who did they serve, and I asked them, and they came back with the obvious question. They said, our policyholders are who we serve. I said, okay, I get it. That makes sense to me. However, if I understand your business properly, when your product is most useful, the customer you just defined has passed away. And they were like, oh, yeah. And then suddenly I said, I want to suggest to you that maybe the people you serve are people who don't even know who you are, who've never paid you a cent in their lives, but in the darkest moments of their life, they are going to call you. The beneficiaries of the policy will one day pick up the phone and call you and expect empathy, compassion, organization, and execution. Now, as I was telling this team this story, a woman in the team, a tear started rolling down her face. I said, what's going on? She goes, well, we just outsourced the claims department to an offshore firm with a simple instruction, prevent fraud first, which meant that call would first treat the person calling as a potential criminal and fraudster long before they got to the empathy and compassion part. And suddenly she realized the gravity of what they had done wrong and wanted to change it. I don't have simple answers for every organization about who do you serve and what would delight look like for them, but I would suggest to you, look at your organization and look past your obvious stakeholders, because in there lies a purpose that can drive the purpose of your organization and pull you to those heights and distances that were previously unimaginable. This was a tough one for me because I got to where I was, VP of R&D, I climbed that career ladder, and I'm the CEO now. I know how I did it. I got to be the smartest guy in the room. I probably drowned out the voice of others from time to time just to make sure my voice was heard first. My team would probably tell you, you still do that, Rich. I had a feedback lunch one time from my team, and Michelle started the thing off. She says, Rich, let me tell you the way these feedback lunches work. You have to spend at least 50% of the time in this session listening. I'm like, oh, there's the first piece of feedback. But here's the beautiful thing about leaders. Leaders can occur anywhere. They don't have to have a title. They don't have to have an office. They don't have to have authority. Leaders lead through influence. Bosses can tell you what to do. And I can tell you there's a lot of different ways to lead, and I'm not here to tell you that bosses are bad and leaders are good, because I'm sure you've all seen good and bad examples of both. And I'll get back to what these pictures mean in just a second. Systems thinking, I told you about the dihedral and the positive stability. I will tell you, systems can produce dramatic effects. One of the stories I tell in my latest book, Chief Joy Officer, is a story of a set of pediatric appointments I had with my kids, where every time we went into the good doctor's office, the waiting room was empty. Is that the way you guys experience any doctor's appointments? You go into an empty waiting room? Now, I will tell you, this was an amazing doctor. The things he taught us were incredible, and yet every time we went to his office, the waiting room was empty. The appointments occurred right on time, and I thought, man, how can this guy be such a great doctor and such a terrible businessman? And then I realized in later life that Dr. John Gall, who was our kid's pediatrician, was one of the world's leading systems thinkers, and what I was seeing was intentional. If I'd only had the forethought to ask him at the time, I might have taken about 10 years off of my life, or added 10 years to my life, because I was going from that doctor appointment back to chaos and bureaucracy. And I will simply say that here is the most maddening poster we have. If you want to take a picture of anything, take a picture of this. Print it out and put it on your wall at work like we have them at Menlo. This statement from Vital Smarts, if you probably know them through their books, Crucial Conversations and Influencer, is maybe one of those most maddening quotes we as leaders of organizations can face. That if you go to work tomorrow, if you go to work when you get back to this conference and things aren't going well, and your temptation is to blame the people, Vital Smarts is saying, no, your organization is perfectly designed to create the behaviors you're currently experiencing. And I could just, we could just sit around and talk about the challenges you're having, and I bet in 5 minutes, just because of all the companies I've gotten to see, we could poke holes in your evaluation systems, your annual performance review process, your hiring practices, how you organize the work, how you manage the work, how do you tell if you're done, how do you tell what's next, all that kind of stuff. We must, as leaders, think about the systems we are using. We must care for our people. And if you're going to care for your people, you have to look at every part of your organizational design. You have to look at every part of how you put your company together. And the way you put your company together is, how do you recruit? How do you interview? How do you make decisions about who you hire? How do you onboard those new people? How do you give them feedback? I will just simply intrigue you, perhaps enough to even go buy the books, that we interview without resumes and without questions. We have no bosses at Menlo. All hiring is done by peer evaluation through the team. We pair everyone together. Everyone works in our company to a computer. The pairs are assigned and we switch them every 5 working days. That alone could be a topic for an entire afternoon of discussion. But why do we do this? Because we have to learn all the time in the software industry. I bet you have to learn. Your world is changing dramatically. I heard you're all going to get sued. That guy who was here this morning. Like, wow, that's an interesting setup for the Joy Talk. I'm sure you're here somewhere, but it was a great talk, let me tell you. I learned a lot. I learned what negative options are, for example. So why do we need to be learning? How many of you remember Borders books? Anybody remember Borders? Yeah, it was fascinating about Borders. You might not know this, is it was born on State Street in Ann Arbor, Michigan, about a block from our office. The office I showed you with my team in it was the world headquarters for Borders Books. At their height, they had 1,000 stores and 20,000 employees. Borders was founded in 1972 based on technology. They had this amazing use of a Digital Equipment Corporation computer you've never heard of, run by a guy you've never heard of named Ken Olsen. Okay, so you can see how things change so rapidly. 1994, Amazon was founded. Borders went out of business completely and entirely in 2011. Borders had 17 years to figure out how to respond to Amazon. They couldn't, they didn't, they disappeared. All of us in our businesses face these kind of existential threats. As Peter Senge says in The Fifth Discipline, in the art and practice of building a learning organization, in the long run, the only competitive advantage you have is to outlearn your competition. In our world, that pairing system is where we build in a lot of the learning. Two people sharing ideas, sharing techniques, sharing things they've learned with one another all day long, and then we switch the pairs so the sharing rockets throughout the team. And then ultimately, we want to be storytellers. Because stories are what bind us together. Stories are what connect heart to mind, body to spirit. These are the stories that we curate. You all have stories inside your organization. You know you do. You may not tell them as often as I do about your own organization, but I would tell you the stories we hang on to, whether positive or negative stories, are the ones that inform everyone who joins later. What are our most important values inside of our organization? At our company, because we host all these tours, the team becomes storytellers because they are leading the tours as people are coming to visit. They tell stories about Menlo. Some of the stories they tell are stories they've heard from me, and they retell them. Many of the stories they tell are their own stories. But the stories that they focus on are the ones that evoke the culture we're either trying to avoid and escape from, or the one we want to build. And I get it. You know, if there are things that bind us together as human beings, I think there are three. Number one, we want to work in community with one another. That is a natural human thing. We don't actually mind hard work either. And to really drive ourselves forward, we want to work on something bigger than ourselves. Now, often people look at me and say, well, you're the top guy, you're the CEO, of course you're the entrepreneur, you started your own company, you can lead like that. And everybody thinks you have to be at the top of your game to drive a company forward, a community forward, or perhaps even like Kennedy did in a 57-second speech in 1962 that drove a nation to the moon and back. That, yeah, can a top leader have a big effect? You bet. But the story I want to leave you with is a different kind of story of leadership. A story that might be closer to your own. If you ever go through Detroit Metro Airport like I do, as often as I do, I have a weakness. You're likely to find me in this McDonald's, having a quarter pounder with cheese, a large fry, and a Coca-Cola. Please don't tell my fitness instructor about this. And so many times when I visited, there was this guy there, and his name was Mike, and he was an older guy, and he was hustling around that McDonald's, and he's clearing off the tables as fast as the customers were moving in and out, and he's cleaning up all the crumbs left behind. And every time he got near me, he'd lean in and he'd say, how's it going? Have a good day. Have a safe flight. Can I get you anything? Can I get you a napkin? And every single time was the same. I'm like, who is this guy? I mean, this is remarkable. They are so lucky to have him. And then the next time I was there, he was off shift, and here's this kid pulling this sled full of garbage out of the back of the McDonald's, going off to the dumpster. Young kid. Goes past my table, and he leans in. He goes, how's it going? Have a safe flight. Can I get you anything? Can I get you a napkin? I'm like, what is going on? You think about it, this is like one of the most relationless places on the planet, inside of one of the most relationless places on the planet, right? I mean, this is McDonald's inside of an international airport. I grabbed the manager shortly after that and thanked him for the difference this made to me personally. And he thanked me for noticing. He said, hey, Rich, this is a highly competitive environment. Anything we can do to increase the chances people are going to come here rather than go there, we're going to try it. And I thought about this story of Mike, the kid, and this manager, and I thought to myself, I'm pretty sure this guy did not call up McDonald's corporate and say, hey, would it be okay if we doled out just a little bit of kindness on a napkin every day? Could you guys have a meeting to form a committee to write a policy? No, he just did it. And in this story is your opportunity inside of whatever you're doing, wherever you're doing it. Start with you. Have a local effect. And like I like to say, run the experiment. Now, let me tell you how run the experiment plays out at Menlo. This is now a famous story inside of our culture, but at the beginning, we didn't know. When you run experiments, you don't know if they're going to work. 12 years ago, Tracy had little Maggie. She was off on maternity leave. She was ready to come back to work. We had an exciting new project starting. And she wanted to be on the team, back on the team. And she came to me, she said, Rich, I want to come back. I said, awesome, how soon can you be here? She says, well, the daycare we plan to use is full, and grandparents live too far away to help. I'm like, oh. Now there was a screaming match that started in my brain that Tracy never heard. You know what these are like? Dark voice, bright voice? Dark voice said, don't you dare say what you're about to say. HR will kill you. The lawyers will freak. The insurance policies will go through the roof. Bright voice said, it's your company. You're an entrepreneur. You can do whatever you want. You don't even have an HR department. Now, I want to stick up for any HR people who might be in the room. Nobody got into HR without wanting to focus on the humans, but eventually we pushed them into torturing people with forms and bureaucracy. That is not their delight or their joy, believe me. But I looked at Tracy in that moment. I said, bring her into work. She said, what do you mean? I said, bring her in. She said, all day? I said, sure. She said, every day? I said, why not? She said, Rich, what? We're in a big open room, because this was not an offer to build a daycare, by the way. Child was going to be with the parent. And she says, where will I put her? I said, she's 3 months old. She's not going anywhere. Just put her in a bassinet on the floor, wherever you're working. She goes, what if she makes a fuss? You'll destroy the whole place. I said, Tracy, you're the mom. I trust you. You'll do the right thing. We'll work it out together. Let's run the experiment. Now, isn't she beautiful? Yeah. I'll tell you, that is not little Maggie. That's Ellie. Ellie is Menlo baby number 8. Okay? Now, when you run experiments, expect the unexpected, especially if it involves little humans. Did Maggie fuss? Of course she fussed. All the babies have. It was the team's response we didn't expect. When the babies fuss, the team's like, no, it's my turn to hold the baby. Ellie learned to pair program. Ellie went to design meetings. And then we started pairing the babies. And I'll tell you, this system works for extroverts and introverts. You can decide which is which. This is Flynn and Josiah, Menlo babies number 22 and 23 in the last 12 years. This has been an amazing experiment. And you want to build loyalty? Whew. Honor the entire family of your team. And I will tell you that one of the other things we discovered is that our customers behave better when you bring babies to meetings. They don't yell at you. They don't swear at you. Boop. Whoops. Then it works twice. Let's just go back one, because I think this is such a delightful. Can you guys just flip back one slide, please? There. Yeah, this was an option for both moms and dads. And we have a great setup for the babies now. This has been a delightful experiment. And this is Henry Learning to Manage. How's it going? What you working on? You coming in this weekend? And then I want to leave you with this story, because this is the opportunity you have in the world with your companies, as I do with mine. And it comes out of this picture. Now, we've always had dogs in our history. Dogs and the babies seem to get along okay. But in this particular case, the gentleman in the orange shirt was one of our clients. We have a weekly meeting with our clients. We call it a show and tell. And in this weekly meeting, this particular time, the customer called me up ahead of time. He says, "Hey, Rich, do you mind if I bring Buster in with me to work into Menlo?" And I said, "Sure. Who's Buster?" He says, "My Great Dane." Oh, okay. Now, Buster greeted me at the front door by putting his paws on my shoulders. I'm 6'5". Buster's head was here. Buster was an awesome dog. And while the stories I tell you are compelling and memorable, I will have people come to me years later telling me they remember the babies and the dog stories. This is not about babies and dogs, because babies in your workplace or dogs may actually be inappropriate. Okay? I get it. In fact, for Michael, dogs were inappropriate where he worked. It wouldn't have been right for him to bring dogs into where he worked. But when he interacted with us, he wanted to be more like us. And this is the grand opportunity inside of each of our organizations, is if we create a compelling enough culture, I will suggest to you one filled with the joy and human energy, you will become an example to the world, so much so that your customers, when they interact with you, want to be more like you. And I will tell you, the journey to this kind of joy starts with the nonconformists that Rollo May talked about almost 100 years ago, when he told us that the opposite of courage is not cowardice, but conformity. My encouragement to you as you go forward from today, take something from this conference, either from me or anybody else you hear from, is to go home and be a nonconformist. Take some new idea back to work, and if somebody you meet who wasn't here, who didn't hear what you heard or saw what you saw, looks you in the eye and says, "Yeah, that won't work here. That's not us. That's against policy. I'm not sure we could get that through." Just look them in the eye and say, "I get it, but let's run the experiment. Let's try something before we form the meeting and form the committee to write the policy." Pursue joy. Thank you very much.